Okay, you guys, everyone back in Zoom land, we're gonna start here. And I just wanted to, for folks out in the audience too, you guys, I asked, we were kind of looking around, and sometimes it's nice to get some outside ideas, hear from people that are, from different areas and see what's working. I understand the Lemhi is different than the Meadows Valley, but we were really curious to see what kind of success they're having over in their neck of the woods. They've been doing balancing restoration, ranching, fish issues over there for quite a long time. So I want to welcome Daniel Bertram from the Office of Species and Conservation, Bob Minton from the Lemhi Soil and Water Conservation District, and Rosanna Reith from the NRCS. And so really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk with us today. And with that, Daniel, I'll hand it over to you.
So anyway, my name is Daniel Bertram. I work for the Governor's Office of Species Conservation. I am the Species Program Manager and Policy Advisor, and I run the shop in Salmon, Idaho. I've been in this current capacity for 8 years, but I have lived in Salmon since 1991. I moved there in 6th grade, and so definitely call it home, and did everything I could after graduating college to get back there, and got lucky enough to get a job that fit with my skill set and what I really love to do. And that's working in the natural resource field, but also working with ag producers and trying to find a win-win solution for all of those involved. Because I do truly believe that the only reason we're able to work in places like the Lemhi Basin is because of the agricultural producers. If we would have been developed and had our little 5-acre farms along the entire Lemhi River, we probably wouldn't be working or doing anything in the basin. So the ag producers truly are one of our best friends. Then I've also got Bob Minton, and he's in Salmon right now. I'm in Boise. So Bob, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Bob Minton, and I'm the project manager actually for the Lemhi Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm retired civil engineering technician from the Natural Resource Conservation Service of 34 years. And I've been back working for this conservation district for almost 7 years now, actually doing on the ranch conservation programs to help and restore our salmon and steelhead.
Thanks, Bob. And yeah, I apologize for not having my camera on. As I mentioned, I'm in a hotel in Boise and my internet isn't the best. So trying to keep this flowing smoothly, I'm just going to keep my camera off. Part of the reason why I asked Bob and Rosanna to help out with this is, as Bob mentioned, he's been around for a long time and was really one of the first guys to start implementing projects in the Lemhi, so brings a wealth of knowledge. And then the NRCS has been an invaluable partner for us in working with ag producers and figuring out the best win-win solutions. And so I really wanted Rosanna to be present. But just know that the NRCS is a tremendous partner, and any questions we can try to answer them. We'll get you more information from Rosanna. And so moving through this presentation, I've got just a quick recap of where the Lemhi is, how it got to where it is now, and then I've got 2 projects that I've highlighted just to kind of give you an idea of some of the work we've done. But please feel free to write any questions in the chat box during the presentation, or feel free to interrupt me. I think this works a lot better if it's a give and take and you guys ask questions, because that truly is what this is about. It's not me trying to convince you into doing one thing that's better or worse. As Wes mentioned, the Lemhi is different. And so these are just ideas, and take what you learn and make improvements on our mistakes. Okay, so for this presentation, I'm going to focus just on the Lemhi Watershed. I assume most of you from the map can tell where the Lemhi is. This is just kind of a neat excerpt from 1957 showing the amount of reds in the Lemhi. And from the town of Lemhi, which is about halfway up the Lemhi, it was documented that there are 719 reds between Lemhi and Ledor. And then below Lemhi, about 180 reds, give or take. This year, I believe we had about 100 reds in the Lemhi. So a significant reduction in our current escapement in the Lemhi. And part of what's happened in the past is, originally the railroad came into the Lemhi, and I am really breezing through this history. There's a tremendous amount more that's happened in the past. Beaver extirpation, beaver trapping. But probably one of the more significant ones was the Lemhi railroad that went down the center of the Lemhi River. And when they installed the railroad grade, it was pretty easy and cheap to put railroad trusses in and cross the Lemhi. I believe it was roughly about 30 railroad trusses that crossed the Lemhi. And then that railroad was removed in 1939, and the highway was placed basically on that railroad grade. And from the Google Earth map, you can see here, the Lemhi is that yellow line that runs right down the map. And it was much cheaper at this point, rather than building bridges across each one of those railroad trusses, to just go ahead and move the Lemhi River. So this is a location on the Lemhi where it literally, the river literally flows in the burrow ditch for the highway for about 1.5 miles and goes right along next to it. Here's another picture where you can see that the highway has really confined where the Lemhi can go. And you can see the old historic channel scars that used to be the valley floor at one time. And the reason this is important is I think agriculture is an easy target for a lot of special industry groups to say that agriculture is the cause of all the problems. And I would argue and say it's actually people. It's not agriculture, but it's human infrastructure and our quest to continue to do things bigger and better. And agriculture is the one that really takes the brunt of really just the hits for most people. And in order to complete this habitat work, I think folks need to really understand that our ag producers are our true partners. And really one of our biggest hopes of trying to do anything that's going to benefit our aquatic species. So now some other things that have happened in the Lemhi River. So after World War II, heavy equipment became readily available for a lot of people and for being able to implement things in the Lemhi very cheaply. As you can see here, equipment used to get in and they would literally start in the middle of the Lemhi River, pushing up just the substrate to either side of the Lemhi, trying to make it a very, very efficient conduit for getting water out of the basin to help prevent flooding, removing all woody debris within the basin. And you can just see what was really happening to the Lemhi. So it's no surprise that fish would struggle in this type of habitat. Along with just pushing up the gravel onto the sides, in order to protect private property, a lot of riprap has occurred along the Lemhi River, trying to stop erosion. And then from the map on the right here, all of these blue dots are surface water points of diversion. So as you can see in the Lemhi River, there's over 700 diversions that came out of the Lemhi River. And at this time, that was mostly flood irrigation. And those flooded fields would withdraw water and then re-input that water back into the system, be rediverted again, or wastewater was reutilized. So you can see that not only through the impacts through heavy machinery on the Lemhi River, but a significant amount of water withdrawals was happening in the Lemhi River as well. And because of that, within the tributary, only 2 tributaries to the Lemhi remained connected to the Lemhi River year round. So that's Hayden Creek. And the primary reason that one stayed connected year round is there just wasn't the agricultural production grounds available in order for people to divert water. The canyon was too narrow and you just couldn't get the water onto the ground. And the other tributary is Big Springs Creek. Some could argue that isn't really a creek, it's more of just a spring channel. But we have, that remained connected throughout the year. And that one's a little harder to see. It's right below where it says Lemhi on the map, just a very small section. But every other tributary within the Lemhi did dry up seasonally due to agricultural and irrigation withdrawals. Now we're up to 7 tributaries that we remain connected year round. And those have been made that way through a number of different avenues, either through easements, flow agreements, or working on sprinkler conversion projects. And this is what the Lemhi River looked like after a lot of those irrigation withdrawals. Here on the left, you can actually see a fish screen bypass coming back into the Lemhi River. And at times, the Lemhi River would actually dry up, and the Idaho Fish and Game Department would put out public service announcements asking locals to go and harvest whatever fish remained in channel, typically Chinook salmon, steelhead, and harvest them out of these pools so that at least they weren't wasted and could be eaten. So that's just a very, very rough, quick overview of some of the history of the challenges that we were trying to face in the Lemhi Basin. And so then I wanted to jump into a couple different projects that we've done just to give you an idea of some of the our methodology for thinking of different solutions within the basin. So this project titled Little Sawmill Habitat Improvement Project, you can actually see the old spring channel flowing right down through this calving facility. And this was a project that the majority of us drove by many times and never even thought about. And in fact, most people thought that that was an irrigation return coming back to the Lemhi River and didn't realize it was a spring channel until we spoke to the landowners and got a little bit more information. With this project, it was a dual project sponsorship. So within the Salmon Basin, we have 21 different partner organizations. And of those, we've got about 8 people that actively implement projects. And what's most important about this is we really try and tailor our projects to the project sponsor that is going to be most fit for that particular project. For example, the Lemhi Soil and Water Conservation District has their own board, and their board are typically agricultural producers. And anytime we're working with a private landowner, particularly with water rights, we really like having that input from other ag producers because water is the lifeblood of many of these folks in the Lemhi. And we need that additional input and that expertise. And also, if you can get one project sponsor that gets very good at implementing a specific type of project, that's less times you have to learn from your mistakes and you continue to get better and better. With Trout Unlimited, they become very good at our in-stream habitat work. And so with this project, we felt it made the most sense to work with the Lemhi Soil and Water Conservation District to implement the irrigation efficiencies, and then work with Trout Unlimited to implement the in-stream habitat improvements. And I can't emphasize that enough, that making sure you've got the right people working on the right project with the right landowners is paramount to having a successful product at the end. So the pre-project conditions on this, you can see, I believe you can see my cursor. So the spring channel just to the left of the 28 was pushed up right onto the side of the hill. And then the landowners cleared the vegetation out. And you can see that little Quonset hut thing looking in the middle. That was actually the calving facility. And as you look at pictures, as I go forward, this was that calving facility. So you can see that the water was very turbid. You're getting lots of nutrients added to that water. And this is actually a spring channel that should look crystal clear, but obviously it's not from these pictures. So I actually happened to run into the landowner at a cattleman's winter school. It's a University of Idaho extension effort they do in the Lemhi County. I just happened to ask them if they would be interested in entertaining some type of project to make conditions better on the land. I didn't go in with any preconceived notion of what to do, didn't have any ideas. And the landowner could have easily said, no, we're not interested. I think that's another really important thing to note is every project that we do is 100% voluntary. We are not regulatory and we have no regulatory rights. So when we're on private property, it is truly, we're there by their permission and their invite only. And if they ask us to leave, then we're happy to do so. So with working with this landowner, we determined that the one thing that they really wanted, and they've wanted for a really long time, but didn't have the financial resources to do it and could never think of a way to get it, was they wanted a pivot, which you can see here in the yellow outline. So through about 2 years of negotiations with the landowners, we tried to determine how we could get them a pivot and also how we could improve the spring channel down at the bottom. And we came up with this harebrained idea of if we were to move that calving facility off of the spring channel, which is in the purple dotted polygon at the bottom, to the area that has the red hash titled New Calving Area. And we build them a calving facility and funded a new pivot for them. Would they be willing to give up this area, which was approximately 4 acres, so that we could do rehabilitation efforts in the stream? And the landowners went for it. A lot of people said, why would you spend that much money on irrigation infrastructure if they're only giving up 4 acres? And people need to realize that, they're giving up 4 acres in perpetuity. By moving that calving facility, they moved it onto productive ground, and they're not going to get that pasture ever again. And so that's an annual loss of production to the landowners. And so from my perspective, it was very easy to justify doing exactly that. These are all the restoration actions that we really set back into motion. I won't read through those for you. I'll keep on moving. And this was the restoration design. So if you remember from that previous slide, that creek was pushed up against the side of the channel, and our new design has it flowing right down through the middle. And this is pre-project. This is during construction. So you can actually see where the channel starts to move into the front. Oops, sorry. And this is what it looks like today. So we've built a kiosk on the side of the highway. The landowners were okay with us doing that to really explain the whole scope of the project, why we did the project, the benefits to the species. And as you can see from this picture, it's really turned into a really nice wetland. And when you go here, it's nothing but songbirds, passerines, a tremendous amount of wildlife utilization, and the willow complex is coming in incredibly quickly. So this is 2 years post-project, and we're extremely happy with how fast it is improving. So this is our anticipated load reduction. As you'll see when I talk about the funding, we partnered with the DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, to help fund this project. And if anybody's received a 319 grant in the past, you actually have to come up with these load reduction estimates, and they help you work through these calculations. But this is on the right-hand column. You can see what we were anticipating this project would actually improve on the system. So through that effort, we partnered with the Bureau of Reclamation, and we actually implemented water quality monitoring. And the highlighted columns here, or rows, are E. coli. And you can actually see that the levels of E. coli through the system, and we didn't do a great job, and this is probably a lesson learned of our water sampling, is water sample at similar times every year, which sounds like a fairly obvious thing to say, but it's many times these are the things you don't think about when you're implementing a program. But if you look at the July, June, August, all fairly similar timeframes, you can really see that the load reduction from E. coli before and after our project has been, I would say, significant. So we're really happy with that. Okay, and then I jump on to the next project. I did have a slide, I thought, that talked about funding for this project, because that is important. A lot of our projects, we source multiple funding agencies. So for Little Sawmill, we used Department of Environmental Quality, their 319 grant, and they've been a very good source of funding to go after, primarily because they are very open to their funds being used for a variety of things on the project, where a lot of our fish dollars are a lot harder and you have to tie those to direct fish benefits. But in order to implement some of these projects, many times you have to do things that don't have a fish benefit. For example, that might have a wildlife benefit, but if it's not a fish benefit, Bonneville Power might not be quite as eager to pay for that. Another funding source is the Natural Resource Conservation Service through the EQIP program. And they've been extremely beneficial for almost every one of our projects as well. So we always get landowners to sign up through EQIP. And then the NRCS is also extremely helpful for designing irrigation systems for us. Almost all of our irrigation infrastructure has been designed by NRCS, and they do that at 100% free of charge to us and to the landowner. So their programs are funded through the Farm Bill, I believe, is how their program gets funded. But I'd highly encourage anybody, if they're looking at doing an irrigation project, to work with your NRCS office. And expertise level, you might determine that contractors are a better bet. We have used contractors for irrigation, but don't overlook the NRCS. And then Bonneville Power Administration and Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Funding have also been other significant sources for these projects. So that was just a really quick overview of a project where habitat and water quality was our primary goal. And we used irrigation infrastructure that a landowner wanted to improve their operation in order to make it a win-win project for us and for the landowner. The next project is one that we wanted to keep water in channel. This project was called the 18-mile Intercept project. And if I can move my mouse without accidentally advancing my slide, you can see that the Holly Creek Channel right in the middle. Nope, sorry. Let me go back and I'll try to explain it. But you can see the Holly Creek Channel right in the middle of that aerial photograph taken back from the 60s. Was basically put in a ditch. And sorry, that's an 18-mile channel. Pushed out of the valley bottom, and then that flow continued in that ditch up to a field that looks like a triangle that's very green and flood irrigated. On this Google Earth picture, right here, you can actually see it a lot better. So where I've got the pin that says Intercept, that was where the 18-mile channel and Holly Creek came together. And then the ditch flowed to the north, up around those pivots, and then back to that triangular field that's dry in this picture, right by the proposed POD. And what this structure did was this right here. It completely stopped all of the flow coming down. So 18-Mile Creek is the flow from coming on the top of the screen, and then Holly Creek is flowing in from the left, and basically made a little lake in order to raise the water level so that the water could flow down this irrigation ditch and irrigate that corner of the field. So we worked with the landowner and NRCS and basically determined that if this landowner was to put in a pivot system, their production would be significantly increased. It was pretty obvious that the flood irrigation was marginal at best, and they weren't getting any production off of that field. They only used it for pasture in the fall while there was a little bit of feed there, but they certainly weren't haying anything off of that field. So this is a before and after picture. On the left, you've got the before with that triangular field where there really wasn't, as I mentioned, much productivity. And then the picture on the right was from 2015. And as you can see, it's a very functional pivot now and producing a lot of water for the landowner. And the way we did this, well, this is the way the creek looks now instead of the way it was in that previous picture. But this was a method, I think, no, I don't have a slide of that one. Let me go back to this design here. So what this one did, and I saw that Clayton asked that question in the previous comment about doing irrigation efficiencies and how do you manage water savings and if other users just use those water savings. So this project really wasn't intended to be a water savings project. What we wanted to do is move the point of diversion downstream. With flood irrigation, you rely on gravity to get the water to the field. But by going to an irrigation infrastructure project, you're actually able to pump that water back uphill. And that keeps water in the channel for much longer and then takes it back out of the channel. Where the current proposed point of diversion is, there's a large spring complex. And so water typically stays within the creek, starting in that location, even if there is water withdrawal. So by moving the where it says intercept downstream to the point of diversion, keeping the water in Holly Creek, you can actually keep that section wetted rather than drying it up at that location. And then you've got the spring influence below, where you don't have to worry about the water withdrawals as much anymore. So by taking actions like this, not only did we move a 100% fish barrier when that structure was in place, but we're able to keep the channel wet for much longer into the year. So it's really knowing what your goals and objectives are. And this certainly was not a water savings or water efficiency project. These are our fundings. This was a slide I thought I had earlier on in the presentation, but I already went through those. And then also our partners with these projects. You know, I failed to mention that IDWR has been a significant partner with us in these projects, making sure that what we do is 100% legal. Whenever we do a project, we make sure that we leave the landowner 100% compliance with Idaho state law. And it's pretty amazing. Most landowners are not within compliance as they've changed their irrigation practices. You know, they haven't necessarily taken all of the proper steps in order to change their water rights as well. And it's not their fault, it's just the nature of the beast. And so we make sure that they get into compliance. And then Idaho Fish and Game has been a tremendous partner too, as far as fish sampling, making sure that what we are doing is actually improving the resource. And then obviously our landowners are probably one of our most important partners, because without landowners, we don't have any projects at all. So coming back forward, you know, really lessons learned, and I think this is what you guys are hoping to take away from this presentation, at least. Our relationship and trust are pivotal. You know, I'd recommend starting with landowners at a small scale and working your way up, and making sure that when you leave a project, you know, the landowners are happy with what they got. You know, I think you have to be realistic, and there has to be a benefit for whatever your funding source is. But being very transparent, not over promising, and actually delivering with what you promise to the landowner in the beginning. And that's how you get new projects. Idaho Water Law is probably one of the hardest things to navigate. I would say it's pretty or extremely complex. And I'd also say that the majority of landowners who divert water don't have an expert grasp of what Idaho Water Law is. They know what they've done. They've known what their father's done and their family's done, and that's what they've always done. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually exactly how Idaho Water Law works. Many times with landowners, they're under the influence that if they do a water efficiency project and they're not using their full water right, that they can lose their water right or portions of it. And Idaho Water Law is very clear that it's the land where your water right sits on. And as long as that land is being irrigated for beneficial use, then your water right is being fulfilled and you don't have to use your entire water right. And so getting the landowners up to speed with water rights and having expert opinion. I'm certainly no water law attorney, but we have brought in water law experts to help us with our projects to make sure that everything is above board. The next lesson learned is really, you know, the knowledge gap that differs between irrigation systems. You know, from someone that isn't an irrigator, you'd think that just switching from flood to pivot would be a pretty easy thing, but it's actually very complex. And just because they're an ag producer doesn't mean they know the first thing about an electric pivot system or a hydraulic pivot system, or what size tires they want, what size nozzles they want, what size drops they want on the irrigation system, what kind of water troughs for cattle they want. And almost any time when we really push a landowner for a specific design or specific pivot, they're not happy in the end because it's not what they thought it was going to be in their mind. So we've really encouraged landowners whenever we're working with them to speak with their neighbors, speak with other people that they trust and learn from them, and then come back and tell us what type of stock water tank do you want? Because if you put 10 ranchers together and ask them what type of stock water tank they want, you're probably going to get 5 different answers. And none of them are wrong and none of them are right. It's just personal preference. Do you prefer a Ford or a Chevy or a Dodge? But getting that exact idea of what they want has saved us a tremendous amount of headaches further down the road. And that ties into that landowner's personal preference. What do they really want? And then we obviously fall into bidding requirements. We have to follow Idaho statute, and almost all project sponsors really, basically resort to lowest bidder wins a project. We have to make sure that we're utilizing these funds that we're getting in the best manner possible. But having the landowner understand that upfront before you bid out a project and knowing exactly how you plan on bidding out the project is incredibly important. Because if you bid it out and a contractor bids on it and you award it, and the next thing the landowner hears about who won the bid, and for whatever reason they don't like that contractor, it can create some significant problems. So making sure that the landowners truly know how the projects are going to be bid and the implementation of that. Then construction implementation. We work primarily within the work window when we're working in the wet, but making sure that you're discussing that with the landowners from the very beginning. When are you going to disrupt their operation, knowing that they need to irrigate and they need to work the land, and it's pretty intrusive having a lot of machinery come onto people's private property. So when's the best time for your mob, demob, and starting to implement construction, realizing that a lot of projects typically go much longer than what's anticipated, and what are the impacts if you do go longer, and how is that going to impact that landowner? So identifying those in the beginning. And then, as I mentioned earlier, identifying the right sponsor for each project, I think is incredibly important in order to continue getting more projects into the basin. And with that, I'll stand for any questions. I know that was a pretty quick, broad overview, but I thought that was pretty good information to get out there.
In the Lemhi's there, did you use any gravity feed in your pivot projects? Because there's a lot of any gravity feed systems due to the elevation there.
Absolutely. So a lot of our irrigation efficiency projects, if we're able to gravity feed, we do use those. And I'd actually say one of our biggest problems we've had with gravity systems often is getting too much pressure. And so a lot of our projects, we've put in pressure reducing stations in order to scrub off some of that pressure. And then one place I would say that we haven't gotten to that I would really like to get to in the future is trying to incorporate some sort of hydro into those systems. If we can benefit from hydro rather than just scrubbing off that pressure, and I can see Bob laughing at that, because it's not necessarily as easy as it may sound, but it's an opportunity out there.
What the question is, what type of temperature reduction did you see with your project in the Lemhi River?
So from Little Sawmill project, that project, and I'm going off of memory here, but the spring channel was consistently 5 degrees colder than what the main stem Lemhi River was. And that's in summer. And the other thing that I feel is incredibly important, in the Lemhi, we have significant icing events, and the Lemhi River gets too cold in the winter. And so in the winter, that spring channel was 3 degrees warmer than the Lemhi at that same location. And so not only does it provide cold water refugia for juvenile rearing in the summer, but it also provides refugia for fish in the winter, which I think is often overlooked. Now, to really answer your question, what type of reduction do we see in the Lemhi? The order of magnitude for flow from the Lemhi to Little Sawmill is fairly significant. And so when we're putting about 5 CFS into, roughly 80 CFS. And so you're not seeing much of an impact to the main stem Lemhi. But you are seeing, right at the confluence, and then, any fish moving downstream have that ability to move up into the spring channel if they so choose.
The question is, did you see a market increase in the fish population?
So that is the $1 million question. Is what we're doing the right thing and the best thing? And it's a very hard question to answer. And I would say that we don't have the best data to truly say yes or no. We're working at trying to solve that question. But when you have to bring into everything that's taken into consideration, from out of basin factors to environmental conditions that are fluctuating annually to different flows. This year, for example, the upper Lemhi probably experienced one of the worst drought conditions in 100 years. And we had very low escapement numbers. And so quantifying, what are survival rates with juvenile salmonids in these low escapement years, we would fully expect those survival rates to be higher. But when you compound that with extremely low flows and very high temperatures, teasing out that, those data is very difficult. But what we do know is, and what we're trying to do is keep the juvenile fish in the Lemhi longer. We have a tremendous amount of fish that leave the basin at age 0. And from pit tagging and survival studies, we know that fish that stick around for 1 year in the basin have higher survival rates to Lower Granite Dam than the fish that leave that first year. And so that's what we're studying right now, is trying to quantify if the fish are sticking around longer through our actions.
Okay, the question is, how much savings are you seeing with pivot systems versus flood irrigation percentage-wise in water use?
So I'll take a stab at it, and then Bob can jump in if he wants. But one thing I'd say is, it's really not a savings. It's more of an efficiency, and that water is being allocated differently. And so to fully answer your question, you have to know exactly how much water they are flood irrigating with on their field, and the times of years that they're doing that. With flood irrigation, particularly in Idaho, particularly in the Lemhi, our users will start flood irrigating approximately March and continue through October, and that can be up to 2 inches of water across the field. And so you need to know how much water they're diverting for their given acreage in order to answer that question. With the pivot systems, typically I would say on average we're using 7 gallons per acre. So that can tell you, if you look at what your pivot circle would be after a project, you could multiply those acres by 7 gallons per acre, and that would give you your water after a project. And so subtract the pre-condition with that 7 gallon per acre would tell you what your water efficiency would be on that. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Bob.
Not a whole lot, really. It's it all depends on what, like you said, what they're taking out to begin with. I can think of one place in particular. The ranch was diverting close to 10 CFS during high water. We go into the closed system and between 2 landowners, and brought that number down to 6. So we were able to leave 4 CFS in the water in the river. So it's just, there's really not a patent answer for you, because it's all over the board. It's like throwing a handful of darts at a dartboard blindfolded.
The question is, what happened? I'm assuming like when they went to pivots, when you went to pivots after the, happened on flood irrigation, what happened to the water table?
So we've got a long study that's been going on for almost 20 years, where we've been monitoring groundwater wells and trying to quantify, what is the impact from switching from flood to sprinkler. And it has been a major concern within the Lemhi River Basin. And we really haven't noticed any difference in that long-term monitoring of the wells for the groundwater table changing. Obviously, it changes seasonally with irrigation, but over the past 20 years, we haven't seen a change in the groundwater table. Now, with that being said, we are very cognizant and we work with the local water master for the Lemhi, and they're flat out are areas that we refuse to put pivots in, and we remain in flood irrigation. There are certain areas where, you know, a downstream landowner is reliant on that wastewater or the water moving down from the landowner above them in order for their irrigation system to work efficiently. And in those areas, you know, we're not going to do a project that has potential harm to another landowner. So I think it's a very good question and one that should always be asked, and working with the local producers to, you know, ascertain whether or not converting from flood to sprinkler is appropriate for that given location.
You know, I know that pivot versus flood irrigation, there's pros and cons to both. And it really, I know it's really site specific, and it really is for half the property it might work, half the property wouldn't. So there's I'm asking more for generalities. If you guys have some lessons learned on, you know, when maybe is the right time to where you think a pivot system is a good thing, and maybe where it's you're not going to get much benefit or maybe even a loss. And so just if you have some just general thoughts on maybe what we should be considering pivot versus flood, and it's just some general impressions maybe over the years. And again, I know it's very site specific, so I'm not, you know, I guess I'm just looking for general thoughts on it.
I can say from my long experience working for the Soil Conservation Service / NRCS, you're going to get better, more efficient irrigation every time with the pivot. It's just, you're able to put the water where you want it. And if you use higher technology with your pivots, you can almost eliminate wind drift and evaporation as well. And you're just going to use less water. I can't think of a single time looking specifically at efficient irrigation where you would have the opposite effect, if that answers your question.
And probably, Wes, I'd say the biggest lesson learned, if you're sort of zoom back out and get away from that landowner, is with an irrigation efficiency project. You know, as I mentioned with Idaho Water Law, it's tied to the ground that's being irrigated. So if a landowner is using, say, 10 CFS and they implement a irrigation efficiency project, and now they only need 6 CFS, there's 4 CFS they aren't using. And if there's a junior water user upstream that has historically had their water shut off because, you know, there just isn't the water for them later in the year, under Idaho Water Law, that the junior user then has the right to use that 4 CFS. So by implementing the irrigation efficiency system, you can actually have less water leaving or less water left in the system for a longer duration. And so, you know, I agree with Bob 100% with what he said, but really understanding what those implications are that you're going to do to the water once you create that efficiency is by far the most important thing to take into consideration, not only for benefiting the species, but also for potential harm to other irrigators. That's probably my biggest recommendation.
Thank you. More questions?
Hi, my name's Dean Dryden. I think I talked to you this spring. I'm curious, that system over there is run of river, right? It doesn't have reservoirs?
Correct.
That's correct.
Yeah. We have reservoir systems here. You know, we have our adjudicated rights. They cut out our reservoirs. We start using them. And so on water rights, how would that affect on from flood irrigation, which we are now, to pressure irrigation with a reservoir system?
I think that would be an excellent question for a water rights expert. Getting somebody that is could really answer your question, knowing all the facts and figures. I think I could give you a guess, but I'd be afraid that I was leading you astray. So I'd rather not answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
One of the upsides and downsides of pivot systems is they are incredibly efficient, and you can, instead of just flooding, flood irrigation is great for grasslands, which is great. But when you have that pivot system go in, have you seen people switch to other crops? And I guess the problem with that would be is now, the upside of this grassland is it's a no-till. You don't fertilize it other than, you have cattle that are naturally fertilizing it. But, when you switch to a pivot, maybe that drive to switch to a different crop, and now it's, I don't know, I'm just throwing things out there, beets or potatoes or something like that, have you seen people switch, now they have this efficient system and you can put water efficiently where you need it. Have you seen folks switch over from ranching to potentially crop production? And with that could come, fertilizers and tilling and other issues. And I don't know, maybe in the Lemhi, it's not conducive to that, but has that been maybe a potential side effect of any of the pivot systems that you've seen?
So I'd say certainly, yes, switching to pivots have their side effects. A good example is if you flood irrigate, you've got your irrigation ditches and places where really aren't in production. And so pheasants, other wildlife species can use those areas that aren't hayed. And if you switch to a pivot, there really isn't anything left for wildlife. And so I would say that that's a negative effect. But probably one of the most important things that we've done is when we design a irrigation system, we design the entire system based on the water that they need in order to function appropriately for that given land. So we won't go in and oversize the pipes and oversize the entire system because that would give them that option in the future of utilizing additional flow. Where what we're selling to our funding agencies, because anything we do, we've got to show what the benefit is to the resource that we're trying to protect. And so if we're telling Bonneville Power that this project will have 4 CFS water savings, we need to make sure that stays going into the future. Where if we gave a landowner bigger pipes than they actually needed, and they wanted to go ahead and switch to a different crop and utilize more water, we're losing that benefit that we've guaranteed to our funding agencies. So I do think that's an important note.
One thing I'd like to point out too, and I can't remember what your percentage you came up with, Daniel, but those of us that are in the fish community now, shall we say, we're only responsible for a small percentage of the actual number of pivots and other sprinkler systems that have been put in here in the last 30 years. By far the largest percentage has been by private landowners putting those in all on their own.
Yeah, I'd completely agree, Bob. And I would estimate that we've installed, approximately 5% of the pivots in the Lemhi Basin. So very good point.
All right, y'all, I think we're there. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you. And, certainly feel free to reach out to us anytime. We've got a pretty good group in the upper Salmon area, and, we're more than happy to help provide any help that we can. And if folks want to come down and check out any projects, we're more than happy to do a field tour as well. So it's good to learn from each other, and we've certainly made our fair share of mistakes. So if we can help prevent any mistakes, that's a good thing.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And again, like as we're building this effort, we're going to have more and more resources that we can share. So again, I go back to, the people that need to be here, the resources that need to be here. We're going to have that list out there, and that's what we're kind of working on next. Is getting those presentations, getting the people in the room, Wes asked me to point out that the speaker's been lined up for December. So the new schedule will start in the month after that, January. Okay, so that's where we're at. We'll start with, you can decide December if you'll start with a Tuesday or Saturday, or we can send out an email. What actually just asked right now, what does the group think? Would you rather start with a Tuesday in January or a Saturday?
I vote Tuesday.
Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Okay, we'll do Tuesday unless you guys got a strong nay. All right, good enough. So we'll be looking for that Tuesday in January. Thanks. We'll see what our rotation can do. Beyond that, yeah, look for our next agenda coming out, and then also look for again that list of people to reach out to. We're going from there. Thanks everybody. It's 3 o'clock. We're done.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, presenters. Thanks, Zoom team. Appreciate it.